everyone, welcome to Roll the Dice here at the Westfield Athenaeum. My name is Christian Bohr, and today we're talking about how to build a long-form style campaign. So what's a campaign? Well, essentially it's your game. It's when you have the same group of friends, roughly, and you're meeting whether weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, even once a year. You're all playing the same group of characters, and you're telling one linear story. Each time you're all playing the same characters, and you get to watch them grow and make choices. The way I see it, it's a bit like writing a novel with friends. It should never be about winning. There is no winning or losing in D&D if everyone's having fun. If it's not about winning or losing, what is it? It's about change. It's about watching your characters become something different than what they started as. You're watching a simple squire, humble and unassuming, go up against monsters, become strong, become brave, and become someone that the world needs, a hero. So this video is going to be a little bit of some tips for Dungeon Masters, how to write this, how to start. First, you don't really need to dive into the setting all that much. It can be very easy to get overwhelmed with how much material is out there. If you look at all of the stuff that Wizards of the Coast has published over, 30 years now? I mean, there's too much for anyone. You'll go insane. They have all of these books, the Monster Manual, the Dungeon Master Guide, the guides to Ravenloft, and Xanathar's Guide to Everything. You can get lost in how much there is. First, focus on a feeling. Focus on how you want your campaign to feel with your players. And that's the important thing for all of this, with your players. I think it's very easy for Dungeon Masters to get lost in, this game is going to be my own personal novel, and we're going to tell this story, and I want this to be the bad guy, and I want this to happen. That's not ever how it works. So, once you've all generally agreed on a theme, with your players' input, decide on what kind of game you want. If you are dead set on running a complex political thriller with revolutions in the streets, corrupt nobility, and the Inquisition brooding over everything, and meanwhile your players just want to play with Boblin the Goblin, it's not going to be very fun for you. So now's the time to start thinking about your actual setting. And again, it's way more important to get a feel for the setting, get what kind of genre you're going for. Maybe you want to have like a high magic setting, something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where people are interacting with the spirit world all the time. They're throwing fireballs and throwing rocks with their brains. Maybe you want a low magic setting, something like Lord of the Rings. Magic is there, but it's used sparingly. Maybe you want the Old West, but with steampunk sci-fi trains. Maybe you want castles floating in the air. Maybe you want to run a horror game, set something like Dracula. Whatever you do, it's up to you and your players. So as far as details go, you really don't need to map out your entire world. What you really need to focus on is a couple areas of interest that your players might want to go to. A way to think about it is that you don't want to set out every single character, every non-playable character, which is an NPC, every monster that your players might face. What you want to do is build kind of a portfolio of these. Make about a dozen different characters that you would be interested in meeting as a player. Make about a dozen different monsters that you would want to fight. And then just have them ready to go. If you try and focus on making it step A, step B, step C, inevitably your players will run you off the rails. Less is more when it comes to writing for a campaign. The biggest pitfall on the trail to being a good Dungeon Master is railroading. Railroading is when you continually decide, as the Dungeon Master, that this happens. This is the next beat of my story, and nothing else, nothing the players do, is going to change my mind. Railroading is when you decide what happens to your players' characters, and they feel that their input does not matter. And at that point, you're not really playing a game anymore. You're telling your own story and making other people sit there for 3 hours and listen to it. Remember to incorporate characters' choices. A little bit of improv can go a long, long way. Let players do fun things. They'll do weird things that you're never going to expect, and sometimes you just roll with it. Run with it and have fun. Generally, once you have your setting, I like to come up with a good villain. The villain is going to be one of the biggest driving forces in your world. In a sense, you can think of the villain as the most important character in the world. because they're the ones driving your players to do things. And that's not always true. That's not always the case. Sometimes your players are going to want to play more of a sandbox game where they can just wander around and fight monsters and have a good time. Not every story needs to be saving the world from the big archdemon or whatever. But in those cases where your characters do actively want to go fight a single evil person, it can really help if you take some time and think about that person. Make your villain someone with hopes, fears, and a goal. My best advice to any aspiring dungeon masters out there, don't panic. If you're playing with your friends, then chances are they actually do want to hang out with you. Things usually work out pretty well, and as long as you are generally ready to go on a couple things, then usually you'll find that the other 70% of the game kind of falls into place. My final advice is that you will usually have a bit more ready than you actually have time to play with, and that's okay. If you do have a bunch of leftover things, characters or monsters or a cool set piece encounter or whatever, and you didn't get to play with it and you want to bring it back later, your players will never know. Thanks for tuning in to Roll the Dice here at the Westfield Athenaeum. I was and am Christian Bohr. In the meantime, don't forget that we have our own virtual Dungeons & Dragons clubs going on here at the Athenaeum. Stay tuned to the calendar on the website for more details. Tune in next time to hear Christian say, "How do I make a one-shot adventure?"